Ethan was not like other people. He didn't enjoy loud parties or spending hours on social media. Instead, he liked quiet places where he could think deeply. Every weekend, Ethan visited the cemetery to pay his respects to his grandfather. His grandfather had been a kind man, full of wisdom and stories about life. Even though he was gone now, Ethan still felt connected to him through these visits. It was more than just a habit. It was a way for Ethan to feel close to someone who had shaped his childhood. One Saturday afternoon, the sky was overcast and raindrops began falling softly on the ground. Ethan stood by his grandfather's grave, holding an umbrella over his head. The rain made everything look gloomy, but Ethan didn't mind. He liked the sound of rain tapping against the leaves and the fresh smell of wet earth. As he bent down to place some flowers on the grave, something unusual caught his eye. The soil around the base of the gravestone seemed different from the rest of the ground. It looked uneven, as if something beneath it had shifted slightly. At first, Ethan thought it might be nothing, just roots growing underneath or maybe animals digging around. But curiosity got the better of him. He set the umbrella aside and knelt down, brushing away the loose dirt with his hands. As he dug deeper, his fingers touched something hard. It wasn't a rock or a root. It felt smooth and metallic. Pulling back more soil, he uncovered what looked like an iron ring embedded in the ground. It was rusty and old, but it was clearly man-made. Ethan's heart started beating faster. What was this? Why would there be a metal ring buried here right next to his grandfather's grave? He hesitated for a moment. This could be dangerous. What if it led to something illegal or unsafe? But then again, how could he ignore it? His grandfather had always taught him to seek answers, no matter how strange they seemed. Taking a deep breath, Ethan grabbed the ring and pulled upward. To his surprise, the ground gave way, revealing a trapdoor hidden beneath the grave. The trapdoor was heavy and creaked loudly as Ethan opened it. A dark hole yawned before him, leading downward into the earth. The air that wafted up smelled musty and damp like an old basement that hadn't been opened in years. But there was something else too, a faint metallic scent that tickled his nose and made his skin prickle. It was unsettling yet fascinating at the same time. Ethan glanced around nervously. The cemetery was empty except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. No one was watching him. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he shouldn't be doing this. What if someone saw him? Or worse, what if something bad happened down there? Despite his doubts, Ethan decided to go ahead. He couldn't leave without finding out what lay below. Grabbing his phone, he turned on the flashlight app and peered into the darkness. A narrow staircase spiraled downward, disappearing into shadows. Each step looked worn and cracked as if it hadn't been used in decades. Taking another deep breath, Ethan stepped onto the first stair. It groaned under his weight, making him freeze for a second. When nothing collapsed or broke, he continued, carefully, one step at a time. The walls were made of rough stone and strange symbols were carved into them. These symbols glowed faintly, pulsating like tiny lights. They weren't like any writing Ethan had ever seen before. They seemed ancient, almost alive, as if they were watching him. As he descended deeper, the air grew colder and heavier. His breath came out in little clouds, even though it wasn't particularly cold outside. The silence was eerie. No birds chirping, no wind blowing. Just the sound of his footsteps echoing off the walls. Every so often, droplets of water fell from the ceiling, landing on his shoulders with a soft splat. Finally, after what felt like forever, Ethan reached the bottom. His phone's flashlight revealed a large chamber filled with strange objects. There were shelves lined with dusty books and scrolls, tables stacked with tools and gadgets covered in cobwebs, and chests overflowing with coins and jewelry. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface polished and clean compared to the rest of the space. On top of the pedestal rested a black orb, about the size of a basketball. The orb shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the light, in odd ways. Its surface rippled gently as if it were breathing. Ethan approached it cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out and touched it lightly with his fingertips. Instantly, a rush of images flooded his mind. He saw towering machines rising from the earth, cities crumbling into ruins, and people running in terror. Explosions lit up the sky and the ground shook violently. Ethan stumbled backward, gasping for air. The visions stopped as suddenly as they had begun, leaving him disoriented and frightened. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Ethan noticed words etched onto the pedestal. They read, "Only those who understand may awaken." What did that mean? And why had touching the orb shown him such horrifying scenes? Ethan didn't know, but he couldn't deny the pull it had on him. Against his better judgment, he picked up the orb and held it close. It felt warm in his hands, almost comforting, despite the fear it inspired. Just as he was about to examine it further, the ground trembled beneath his feet. Dust rained down from the ceiling and a low rumble echoed through the chamber. Panicking, Ethan realized he needed to get out of there fast. Clutching the orb tightly, he ran back up the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time. When he emerged into the daylight, rain poured down harder than before. Ethan slammed the trapdoor shut and leaned against it, trying to catch his breath. His clothes were soaked, and his hands trembled as he stared at the orb. What had he just discovered? And what was he supposed to do with it? One thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. Ethan stood in the pouring rain, clutching the strange orb tightly in his hands. The cold droplets soaked through his clothes, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing with questions. What was this thing? Where had it come from? And why had it been hidden beneath his grandfather's grave? The visions it had shown him were vivid and terrifying. Tall machines rising from the ground, cities collapsing, people screaming in panic. It felt like a warning, but a warning about what? He looked back at the trapdoor, half expecting something to burst out of it. But the cemetery remained eerily quiet, save for the sound of rain hitting the gravestones. Shivering, Ethan decided to leave before anyone saw him. He couldn't explain what he'd found even if he wanted to. Who would believe him? Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that taking the orb was a mistake. Something deep inside told him it didn't belong above ground. Back home, Ethan locked himself in his small apartment. He placed the orb on his kitchen table and stared at it, trying to make sense of its shifting surface. It shimmered faintly, almost hypnotically, as though it were alive. The metallic scent he'd noticed earlier lingered in the air, making his nose itch. Despite the unease creeping up his spine, he couldn't resist examining it further. Using his phone, Ethan took several pictures of the orb and uploaded them to an online forum dedicated to mysteries and unexplained phenomena. He hoped someone might recognize it or have information about its origin. While waiting for replies, he turned his attention to the symbols he'd seen carved into the walls of the underground chamber. They glowed faintly in his memory, pulsating like living things. He sketched them roughly onto a piece of paper and searched online for similar patterns. Hours passed, but nothing matched. No ancient language, no alien script, nothing. It was as if the symbols didn't exist, at least not in any database humans had access to. Frustrated, Ethan leaned back in his chair and sighed. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal. That night, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, the visions returned. The towering machines, the crumbling cities, the terrified screams. At first, he thought it was just his imagination replaying what he'd seen earlier. But then something changed. The images became sharper, more detailed. He could hear voices now speaking in languages he didn't understand. Their words echoed in his mind, urgent and menacing. Ethan bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat. Was he losing his mind? Or was the orb doing this to him? Determined to get answers, he went back to the kitchen and picked it up again. This time, instead of fear, he focused on curiosity. If this object held secrets, maybe he could unlock them. As soon as his fingers touched the orb, it reacted. A yo, soft hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Ethan nearly dropped it in surprise, but the orb stayed steady in his hands. Suddenly, a beam of light shot upward, projecting a holographic map into the air. The map showed Earth, but it wasn't like any map Ethan had ever seen. Bright red dots covered its surface, marking locations all over the globe. One dot blinked rapidly. It was right where Ethan lived. Before he could process what this meant, the lights in his apartment flickered. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting and stretching unnaturally. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. These weren't ordinary shadows, they moved with purpose, forming shapes that looked vaguely human but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with elongated limbs that bent at impossible angles. One shadow detached itself from the wall and stepped forward. Its form solidified slightly, revealing glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. Ethan backed away, his heart pounding. "What do you want?" he whispered, though he doubted it could understand him. To his shock, the shadow responded, not with words but with gestures. It pointed repeatedly at the orb, then toward the floor. Ethan realized it was trying to communicate. Somehow, he understood. The orb needed to be returned. But why? And what would happen if he refused? The shadows grew restless, their movements becoming jerky and aggressive. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and Ethan's breath came out in visible clouds. He tried to ignore the chill and focus on the map floating above the orb. Each red dot represented a location, he guessed. But what did they mean? Were there more places like the one beneath his grandfather's grave? Suddenly, the orb emitted a high-pitched whine that made Ethan's ears ring. The map vanished, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, the shadows surged forward, surrounding him. Their glowing eyes bore into him, filling him with dread. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over a chair and landing hard on the floor. The orb slipped from his grasp and rolled across the room. As soon as it stopped moving, the shadows froze too. They hovered motionless, as if waiting for something. Panting, Ethan crawled toward the orb and grabbed it. Instantly, the shadows retreated, melting back into the walls. The lights flickered back on and the oppressive cold lifted. Ethan sat there trembling, unsure of what had just happened. Over the next few days, strange occurrences plagued his apartment. Objects would move slightly when no one was looking, a book falling off a shelf, a glass sliding across the counter. At night, he heard faint whispers coming from the corners of the room. The orb seemed to pulse gently in response, as if acknowledging the voices. Ethan knew he couldn't keep it. Whatever the orb was, it wasn't safe here. He had to take it back, to return it to the place where he'd found it. But he also knew he couldn't do it blindly. There were too many unanswered questions. What exactly was this thing? Why had it been buried underground? And who, or what, had created it? Determined to find answers, Ethan prepared for another trip to the cemetery. He packed a flashlight, a notebook, and a camera, hoping to document everything he encountered. He didn't know what awaited him down there, but he couldn't ignore the pull any longer. The orb demanded his attention, and the shadow, they were watching. Ethan's decision to return to the underground chamber wasn't made lightly. He knew it was dangerous, but staying away felt even worse. The orb had become a constant presence in his life, its weight both literal and metaphorical. Every time he looked at it, he felt as though it were whispering secrets only he could hear, but secrets he couldn't quite understand. Worse still, the shadows that haunted his apartment seemed to grow bolder each day. They no longer stayed confined to the walls. They slithered across the floor, twisted around furniture, and lingered near the orb like silent sentinels. On the morning of his planned return, Ethan woke up exhausted. Sleep had been impossible. Visions of crumbling cities and towering machines filled his dreams again. But this time there was something new, a faceless figure standing in the distance, pointing directly at him. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. Its gesture felt like an accusation, as if Ethan had done something wrong. When he opened his eyes, the image lingered, etched into his mind like a scar. He packed his bag with care, choosing items that might help him navigate the mysterious chamber. Below, a sturdy flashlight, extra batteries, a notebook, and a camera were essentials. He also brought a small hammer and chisel, just in case he needed to break through anything, or defend himself. Though he tried to stay calm, his hands trembled as he zipped up the bag. The journey to the cemetery felt longer than usual. The sky was overcast, casting a gray pall over everything. Leaves crunched underfoot as Ethan walked, their sound muffled by the oppressive silence. When he reached his grandfather's grave, he hesitated. The trapdoor gaped open exactly as he'd left it days earlier. For a moment he considered turning back. But the thought of those shadows returning to his apartment, and possibly growing, stronger, pushed him forward. Taking a deep breath, Ethan descended into the darkness once more. The staircase creaked beneath his weight, each step echoing ominously. The symbols carved into the walls glowed faintly, pulsating in rhythm with his heartbeat. As he reached the bottom, he noticed something different. The air felt heavier, almost suffocating. The metallic scent was stronger now, making his head spin slightly. Inside the chamber, nothing appeared to have changed. The artifacts remained where they were, covered in dust and cobwebs. The pedestal stood in the center, waiting patiently for the orb's return. Ethan approached it cautiously, holding the orb in both hands. His palms were sweaty, and his grip tightened reflexively. As he placed the orb onto the pedestal, a wave of energy surged through the room. The ground trembled, and the glowing symbols on the walls brightened until they nearly blinded him. Ethan shielded his eyes, stumbling backward. When he lowered his arm, the holographic map reappeared, larger and more detailed than before. This time, however, it wasn't just Earth. It showed stars, planets, and entire galaxies connected by thin threads of light. Ethan stared in awe, unable to comprehend the scale of what he was seeing. Then, the map shifted focus, zooming in on one particular planet, Earth. The red dots pulsed brighter, revealing intricate networks beneath them. One network led straight to the chamber he was standing in. Another stretched outward, branching into countless tunnels and chambers hidden deep underground. Before Ethan could process this information, the shadows returned. They poured out of the walls, darker and denser than ever before. Their forms solidified partially, becoming vaguely humanoid figures with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. They surrounded him, their movements jerky yet deliberate. Ethan froze, his heart pounding wildly. One of the figures stepped forward, separating itself from the others. Its body shimmered faintly, as if struggling to maintain its shape. Despite its unnatural appearance, Ethan sensed intelligence behind its gaze. It pointed at the orb, then at the map, and finally at Ethan himself. Somehow he understood. The orb was a key, and he was part of its purpose. "Why are you showing me this?" Ethan asked aloud, his voice trembling. In response, the shadow raised a long, spindly arm and touched the pedestal. Instantly, visions flooded Ethan's mind. He saw Earth millions of years ago, untouched by humans. Alien beings descended from the skies, their ships sleek and otherworldly. These beings weren't conquerors, they were refugees fleeing a cosmic war. They sought sanctuary on Earth, sealing themselves away in stasis chambers buried deep underground. To protect their resting places, they created guardians, the shadows, that would watch over them and ensure their safety. But something went wrong. Over millennia, the guardians grew unstable, corrupted by isolation and fear. They began to see humanity as a threat, believing that humans would disturb the aliens' slumber. Now, awakened prematurely by Ethan's interference, the guardians wanted the orb returned to restore balance, or so they claimed. Ethan pulled himself out of the vision, gasping for air. The shadow stood motionless, waiting for his reaction. Slowly, Ethan nodded. He understood now, or at least, he thought he did. The orb wasn't just a relic. It was a tool designed to control the Guardians and maintain the aliens' dormancy. By taking it, he had disrupted that balance. "What happens if I don't put it back?" Ethan asked, though he already feared the answer. The shadow didn't reply verbally. Instead, it gestured toward the map, highlighting the red dots. Ethan realized the implications immediately. If the orb wasn't returned, the Guardians would awaken the aliens prematurely. And who knew what would happen then? Would they view humanity as allies or enemies? Determined to prevent catastrophe, Ethan examined the pedestal closely. The symbols etched onto its surface matched some of the carvings on the walls leading deeper into the chamber. Following these markings, he discovered a narrow passageway branching off from the main room. The shadows followed silently, their glowing eyes watching his every move. The passage sloped downward, twisting and turning unpredictably. The air grew colder with each step, and Ethan's flashlight flickered sporadically. Shadows danced along the walls, merging and splitting like living things. Despite his fear, Ethan pressed onward, driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation. After what felt like hours, the passage opened into another vast cavern. This one was far grander than the first, filled with rows upon rows of stasis pods. Each pod contained an alien being, suspended in a translucent liquid that shimmered faintly. Their bodies were unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, tall and slender, with smooth, featureless faces and skin that glowed softly. In the center of the cavern stood a control panel identical to the pedestal above. Realizing what he had to do, Ethan retrieved the orb and placed it carefully onto the panel. Instantly, the entire cavern lit up. The pods hummed with energy, their surfaces rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The shadows gathered around Ethan, their forms stabilizing. Further, one of them stepped forward, its glowing eyes locking onto his. Through telepathy, it spoke directly into his mind. "You have restored balance. For this, we will spare your kind. For now." Ethan swallowed hard, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Before he could respond, the aliens within the pods began to stir. Their eyes opened slowly, glowing with an inner light. The shadows retreated, dissolving into the walls as if their duty was complete. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Ethan climbed back up the stairs, sealing the trapdoor behind him. Though he had survived, he knew the truth would haunt him forever. Humanity remained safe for now, but the aliens' warning lingered. Next time they wouldn't hesitate to act. Ethan emerged from the trapdoor into the cold, damp air of the cemetery. His hands were trembling, and his legs felt like jelly after the long climb back to the surface. He sealed the trapdoor carefully, making sure it looked undisturbed. But, no matter how hard he tried to focus on the task at hand, his mind kept replaying what he had seen in the cavern below. Rows of stasis pods glowing faintly, alien beings stirring inside them, and the shadowy guardians dissolving into nothingness. As he stood there, rain began to fall again, soaking through his already damp clothes. The sound of water dripping off gravestones echoed around him, but Ethan barely noticed. His thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of everything. What did it mean that humanity was spared, for now? Were the aliens truly grateful for restoring balance, or were they simply biding their time before doing something far worse? Walking home felt surreal. Every step seemed heavier than the last, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. When he finally reached his apartment, he collapsed onto the couch, clutching his head in his hands. For the first time since discovering the orb, the apartment felt eerily quiet. No shadows moved across the walls, no whispers echoed in the corners. It was as though the presence of the orb and the guardians had vanished completely. But Ethan knew better. Just because he couldn't see or hear them didn't mean they were gone. They were still out there, watching, waiting. And now, so were the aliens. Searching for answers. Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into research, desperate to understand more about the beings sleeping beneath the earth. He scoured books, websites, and forums for any mention of ancient civilizations, extraterrestrial life, or unexplained phenomena. Most of what he found was either conspiracy theories or pure fiction, but occasional nuggets of information caught his attention. One article mentioned a legend about star people who came to Earth during prehistoric times, seeking refuge from a great war among the stars. Another spoke of underground cities built by advanced races long before humans existed. While none of these stories provided concrete evidence, they aligned eerily with what Ethan had witnessed in the cavern. He also revisited the symbols carved into the walls of the chamber. Sketching them repeatedly, he noticed patterns that hadn't been obvious before. Some resembled constellations, while others looked like mathematical equations or diagrams of energy flow. Could these symbols hold clues about the aliens' origins, or their intentions? Despite his efforts, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. There was a piece of the puzzle he hadn't uncovered yet, a key detail that would tie everything together. A visit to grandfather's passed one evening. While sorting through old boxes in his attic, Ethan stumbled upon a dusty photo album belonging to his grandfather. Flipping through its pages, he discovered pictures he'd never seen before. Snapshots of his grandfather as a young man, posing with friends near strange rock formations. In one photo, his grandfather stood beside a large stone slab etched with familiar symbols. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. These were the same markings he'd seen in the underground chamber. How could his grandfather have known about them? And why had he never mentioned it? Determined to learn more, Ethan called his grandmother, who lived in a nursing home several hours away. She rarely talked about her late husband, but this time, she opened up. "Your grandfather always had a fascination with history," she said softly over the phone. "He spent years exploring caves and ruins, searching for, well, I'm not sure what exactly. He used to say there were secrets buried deep beneath the earth, secrets meant to protect us." "Did he ever find anything?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. His grandmother hesitated. "Once when we were younger, he told me he'd discovered something incredible, something that could change the world. But he wouldn't tell me what it was. All he said was that some things are better left alone." Ethan thanked her and hung up, his mind racing. His grandfather must have known about the underground chamber and the aliens. Perhaps he had even been tasked with guarding the secret, ensuring no one disturbed the grave until the right moment. Facing reality, armed with this new knowledge, Ethan returned to the cemetery, hoping to uncover more clues. This time, he brought tools, a pickaxe, a shovel, and a camera. Carefully, he began digging around the base of the grave, searching for anything unusual. After hours of work, his shovel hit something solid. Clearing away the dirt, he revealed another hidden compartment beneath the trapdoor. Inside was a small metal box, rusted but intact. Opening it, Ethan found a journal wrapped in oilcloth. The pages were brittle with age, but the writing was legible. It belonged to his grandfather. The entries detailed decades of exploration and discovery. His grandfather described finding the underground chamber as a young man and learning about the aliens' plight. According to the journal, the aliens weren't just refugees. They were scientists studying Earth's unique properties. Their experiments required them to remain in stasis, protected by the Guardians. But over time, the Guardians grew unstable, mistaking human activity for threats. The final entry sent chills down Ethan's spine. "I fear the day will come when someone awakens the Guardians prematurely. If that happens, the consequences could be catastrophic. For now, I have sealed the chamber and marked its location carefully. May whoever finds this heed my warning. Do not disturb what lies beneath unless you are prepared to face the truth and the cost." Ethan closed the journal, his hands shaking. His grandfather had known all along. He had sacrificed his own curiosity to keep the secret safe, and now, Ethan had broken that promise. Preparing for what comes next. With the journal in hand, Ethan realized he couldn't undo what he'd done. The aliens were awake, at least partially, and the Guardians were aware of humanity's existence. The only question was what they planned to do next. Ethan decided to document everything: the orb, the chamber, the visions, the shadows, and the aliens. Using his camera and notebook, he created a detailed record, including photos of the symbols and transcripts of his experiences. He uploaded the files to a secure cloud server, ensuring they wouldn't be lost. But he also knew he couldn't trust anyone else with this knowledge. Not yet. Humanity wasn't ready to face the truth about the aliens or the Guardians. If word got out, panic would ensue, and governments might attempt to exploit the technology. That could lead to disaster. For now, Ethan resolved to monitor the situation closely. He visited the cemetery regularly, checking for signs of activity. Occasionally, he felt a faint vibration beneath his feet, as if the ground itself were alive. Other times, he swore he saw faint glimmers of light emanating from the soil. Though he tried to live a normal life, Ethan couldn't ignore the looming threat. The alien's warning echoed in his mind every night. For now, we will spare your kind. What would happen when for now ended? Ethan's life had changed forever. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between the ordinary world above ground and the hidden realm beneath it. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not just by the shadows, or the aliens, but by something far greater. The weight of what he'd uncovered pressed down on him relentlessly. It wasn't just about keeping secrets anymore. It was about survival, for himself, for humanity, and perhaps even for the aliens sleeping in their stasis pods. The days turned into weeks, and Ethan became obsessed with monitoring the cemetery. He visited daily, sometimes twice, checking for any changes near his grandfather's grave. At first, everything seemed calm. The trapdoor remained sealed, the ground stable, and no unusual vibrations disturbed the air. But then, subtle signs began to appear. Small cracks formed around the edges of the trapdoor as if the earth itself were shifting. Faint glimmers of light pulsed beneath the soil at night, visible only when Ethan knelt close enough to see them. One evening, as he stood by the grave, Ethan felt a sudden wave of dizziness. His vision blurred, and the familiar sensation of cold dread washed over him. Visions flooded his mind again, this time clearer than before. He saw massive machines emerging from underground tunnels, tearing through cities and landscapes. People screamed and ran in terror as towering alien figures walked among them, their glowing eyes scanning the chaos. But these weren't the same peaceful beings he'd glimpsed in the stasis pods. These aliens radiated anger, fear, and confusion. They weren't here to coexist. They were here to reclaim what they believed was theirs. When the vision faded, Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The message was clear. The aliens weren't content to stay dormant. Something, or someone, was pushing them toward awakening fully. And if that happened, humanity would pay the price. A final decision, desperate for answers, Ethan returned to the underground chamber one last time. This trip wasn't motivated by curiosity or fear. It was driven by necessity. If he didn't act now, the consequences could be catastrophic. Armed with his flashlight, notebook, and camera, he descended into the darkness once more. The staircase creaked under his weight, and the glowing symbols on the walls pulsed faintly as he passed. When he reached the main chamber, he noticed something new. The pedestal holding the orb had changed. Etched onto its surface were fresh markings, symbols unlike anything he'd seen before. They shimmered brightly, almost beckoning him closer. Ethan approached cautiously, placing his hand on the orb. Instantly, a holographic projection filled the room. This time it wasn't a map of Earth or the galaxy. It was a timeline. Dates floated in the air, accompanied by images of events both past and future. Some showed moments Ethan recognized: his discovery of the chamber, the Guardians' awakening, and the aliens stirring in their pods. Others depicted scenes yet to come: aliens rising from the ground, humanity fighting back, and entire cities reduced to rubble. At the end of the timeline, a single phrase appeared in bold letters: "Balance must be restored." Ethan understood what he had to do. The orb wasn't just a key, it was a failsafe. By returning it to the control panel in the cavern below, he could stabilize the system and prevent the aliens from awakening prematurely. But doing so came with a cost. Once activated, the orb would lock itself permanently in place, cutting off all access to the chamber. No one, not even Ethan, would be able to enter again. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized what this meant. He would never learn the full truth about the aliens, the Guardians, or his grandfather's role in protecting the secret. All he could do was trust that his actions would save humanity, and hope that the aliens would honor their promise to spare his kind. Into the depths. With a heavy heart, Ethan followed the narrow passage leading deeper into the cavern. The shadows lingered behind him, silent but watchful. As he entered the grand chamber filled with stasis pods, he noticed a change. The liquid inside the pods rippled violently, and the aliens within stirred restlessly. Their glowing eyes opened wider, locking onto Ethan as if sensing his presence. Reaching the central control panel, Ethan placed the orb carefully onto its designated spot. The moment it clicked into place, the entire cavern lit up. The pods hummed louder, vibrating with energy. The shadows gathered around Ethan, forming a protective circle. One stepped forward, its form solidifying completely. Its glowing eyes met Ethan's, and through telepathy it spoke. "You have chosen wisely. Balance will be restored, for now." Ethan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Will you leave us alone?" he whispered. The shadow hesitated before responding. "We will watch. Humanity has proven unpredictable. If balance is broken again, we cannot guarantee restraint." Before Ethan could ask more questions, the orb emitted a blinding flash of light. The cavern shook violently and the pods sealed themselves shut. The liquid inside froze, preserving the aliens in their slumber once more. The shadows dissolved into the walls, disappearing entirely. Back above ground, exhausted and emotionally drained, Ethan climbed back to the surface. Sealing the trapdoor behind him, he took one final look at his grandfather's grave. For the first time since discovering the secret, he felt a sense of closure. He had done everything he could to protect humanity, even if it meant sacrificing his own peace of mind. Life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an experience. Ethan continued his routine, visiting the cemetery occasionally to ensure nothing unusual occurred. The cracks around the trapdoor healed over time, and the faint glimmers of light vanished. It was as if the underground chamber had been erased from existence. But Ethan knew better. Deep down, he understood that the aliens were still there, waiting. Their warning echoed in his mind every night. "For now, we will spare your kind." What would happen when "for now" ended? Ethan didn't know. All he could do was live each day to the fullest, cherishing the fragile balance he had helped restore. Epilogue. A legacy. Preserved. Years later, Ethan wrote a letter to his future grandchildren, explaining everything he had discovered. He included sketches of the symbols, photographs of the chamber, and copies of his grandfather's journal. At the end of the letter, he added a single sentence. "Some secrets are meant to remain buried, but not forgotten. Protect them, as I have tried to protect ours." Sealing the envelope, Ethan placed it in a safe, hoping it would never need to be opened. The world above ground carried on, blissfully unaware of the ancient guardians lying dormant beneath their feet. And Ethan, though haunted by memories of the past, found solace in knowing he had played his part in preserving the fragile thread of coexistence.